It was a quiet golden afternoon at my seaside cottage, the kind of afternoon where the world seems to hold its breath. The sun poured in through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the hardwood floors. I had always loved the sea. It had been my refuge since my husband passed away. The rhythm of the waves crashing on the shore brought me a strange sense of peace. My nephew Jason had been staying with me for a few weeks to help with the house and keep me company. He was a good boy, always kind and respectful, but like all young men his age, he had his own life to get on with. Lately, he had been bringing his friend, David, over to help with chores. David was a strong young man, perhaps no older than 22 or 23. I didn't know him well, but he was polite, always offering to carry my groceries or fix something around the house. The two of them were good company, but there was something about David. His quiet confidence, the way he moved, the easy way he smiled at me. It stirred something inside me I hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was just the loneliness of the past few years catching up with me, or maybe it was something else. Today, Jason had left to run some errands, and David had stayed behind to help me clean out the attic. It was a peaceful afternoon, but beneath that peace, I felt an odd sense of anticipation. As I sat in the living room, the soft creak of the attic stairs caught my attention. David was up there, sorting through old boxes and furniture, working diligently in the warmth of the afternoon. I could hear him moving things around, his footsteps light but steady. It had been years since I had gone through those old memories stored away, and I was grateful for his help, though I hadn't expected the effect his presence would have on me. I stood up from my chair, smoothing the folds of my dress, and wandered toward the window that looked out onto the sea. The vast expanse of water, glittering under the sunlight, calmed me, but inside I felt a strange restlessness. It wasn't unfamiliar. No, this was something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. Desire. Not for anyone in particular, just the kind that reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling the warmth of another person. David had been kind to me, offering his help with a shy smile, his eyes never quite meeting mine for too long. But in those brief moments when he did, I saw something there. Curiosity, maybe even admiration. Or was it just my imagination? I found myself wondering what he was thinking about me. A woman my age should know better, I thought, but the idea of him looking at me the way a man looks at a woman made my heart race. I tried to dismiss it, shaking my head as I turned back to the room, but the thought lingered. David came down from the attic a little while later, his shirt stained with dust and sweat from the heat of the afternoon. He smiled at me as he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "That should do it for now, Mrs. Hastings. Anything else I can help you with?" His voice was smooth, casual, but I noticed how his gaze briefly flicked over me before settling on my face. "I think that's enough work for today, David," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "You've done more than enough. Why don't you sit down and have something cold to drink?" "Sure, that sounds good," he replied, walking over to the kitchen table where I had already set out some iced tea. He sat down, and I poured him a glass, my hands trembling slightly as I handed it to him. I couldn't help but notice the way his fingers brushed mine as he took the glass from me. It was such a small thing, yet it sent a shiver through my body. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our drinks. The air between us was thick with something unsaid, and I could feel my pulse quicken every time his eyes met mine. I wondered if he could sense it too, the tension that seemed to hang between us like a storm cloud, ready to burst at any moment. After a while, David excused himself, saying he needed to wash up. I watched him walk down the hallway toward the bathroom, his back straight, his steps unhurried. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left alone in the living room, my mind racing. What was I doing? Was I really entertaining the idea of something happening between us? A man so much younger than me? I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the surge of excitement that coursed through me. I stood up, restless, and walked toward my bedroom. The door was half open, and the sunlight streamed in through the window, casting long shadows across the room. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something monumental was about to happen. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I smoothed the sheets beneath me. The room felt suddenly smaller, more intimate, as I let my thoughts wander to David. His strong hands, his easy smile, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Before I knew what I was doing, my fingers brushed against the soft fabric of my dress, tracing the curves of my body. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to feel this way, to indulge in these thoughts. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the afternoon wash over me as I surrendered to the moment. And then I heard it. The soft creak of the door. My heart leapt into my throat as I opened my eyes, startled, only to see David standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. Neither of us moved. Time seemed to freeze as our gazes locked, the air between us thick with tension. I should have said something, should have covered myself, should have done anything to stop the situation from spiraling further. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps as I waited for him to make the next move. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to stretch as we stood frozen in place, both unsure of what to do next. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. David was still standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. I could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the way he hesitated, unsure whether to leave or to stay. There was something raw in his gaze, a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and something darker, something more primal. My mind raced, torn between two powerful forces, the shame of being caught in such an intimate moment, and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. I had never imagined myself in a situation like this, vulnerable, exposed, and yet something within me had been awakened. I couldn't deny it, no matter how much I wanted to. It was as though a fire had been lit deep inside me, a fire that had been dormant for years, and now that it had been ignited, I didn't want it to go out. I should have said something. I should have apologized, made some excuse, anything to break the tension that hung heavy between us. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself staring at him, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, embarrassment, fear, desire. And then, without thinking, I whispered the words that would change everything. "David." My voice was barely audible, but it was enough to pull him from his frozen stance. He blinked, his expression softening slightly, but he still looked unsure. His body was tense, as if he were ready to bolt out of the room at any moment. "I didn't mean to," he began, his voice faltering. I didn't think, I didn't know you were—" He stopped himself, his face flushing with a mixture of confusion and guilt. "It's okay," I interrupted softly, surprising even myself with the calmness of my tone. "You don't have to explain." David looked at me, his eyes searching my face for some kind of understanding. I could see the turmoil in him, the uncertainty. He wasn't a boy, but he wasn't quite a man either, not in the way life hardens you after decades of living. He was caught between youth and adulthood, between the desire to act on impulse and the wisdom to hold back. And right now he didn't know which way to turn. I should have let him go. I should have allowed him to leave the room, to walk out of this moment, so that we could both pretend it never happened. But the truth was, I didn't want him to leave. The tension that had been simmering between us for weeks had finally boiled over, and now that the barrier had been broken, I didn't want to build it back up again. "David, wait!" My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. He paused, his hand still resting on the door frame, half turning toward me. His expression was a mix of confusion and something else, something that mirrored the desire I felt building inside of me. I hesitated, unsure of what exactly I wanted to say. How could I explain this? How could I put into words the complex mix of emotions I was feeling? I wasn't even sure I understood it myself. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end, not yet. "You don't have to go." David's brow furrowed, and for a second I thought he might laugh at the absurdity of what was happening. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with a seriousness that I hadn't seen in him before. The boyishness in his face had been replaced by something deeper, something more intense. "Are you sure?" His voice was low, cautious, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to stretch as we stood frozen in place, both unsure of what to do next. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. David was still standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. I could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the way he hesitated, unsure whether to leave or to stay. There was something raw in his gaze, a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and something darker, something more primal. My mind raced, torn between two powerful forces, the shame of being caught in such an intimate moment, and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. I had never imagined myself in a situation like this, vulnerable, exposed, and yet something within me had been awakened. I couldn't deny it, no matter how much I wanted to. It was as though a fire had been lit deep inside me, a fire that had been dormant for years, and now that it had been ignited, I didn't want it to go out. I should have said something. I should have apologized, made some excuse, anything to break the tension that hung heavy between us. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself staring at him, caught in a whirlwind of emotions: embarrassment, fear, desire. And then, without thinking, I whispered the words that would change everything. "David." My voice was barely audible, but it was enough to pull him from his frozen stance. He blinked, his expression softening slightly, but he still looked unsure. His body was tense, as if he were ready to bolt out of the room at any moment. "I didn't mean to," he began, his voice faltering. I didn't think, I didn't know you were—" He stopped himself, his face flushing with a mixture of confusion and guilt. "It's okay," I interrupted softly, surprising even myself with the calmness of my tone. "You don't have to explain." David looked at me, his eyes searching my face for some kind of understanding. I could see the turmoil in him, the uncertainty. He wasn't a boy, but he wasn't quite a man either, not in the way life hardens you after decades of living. He was caught between youth and adulthood, between the desire to act on impulse and the wisdom to hold back. And right now he didn't know which way to turn. I should have let him go. I should have allowed him to leave the room, to walk out of this moment, so that we could both pretend it never happened. But the truth was, I didn't want him to leave. The tension that had been simmering between us for weeks had finally boiled over, and now that the barrier had been broken, I didn't want to build it back up again. "David, wait!" My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. He paused, his hand still resting on the door frame, half turning toward me. His expression was a mix of confusion and something else, something that mirrored the desire I felt building inside of me. I hesitated, unsure of what exactly I wanted to say. How could I explain this? How could I put into words the complex mix of emotions I was feeling? I wasn't even sure I understood it myself. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. Not yet. "You don't have to go." David's brow furrowed, and for a second I thought he might laugh at the absurdity of what was happening. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with a seriousness that I hadn't seen in him before. The boyishness in his face had been replaced by something deeper, something more intense. "Are you sure?" His voice was low, cautious, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I nodded, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. I knew what I was doing. I wasn't a foolish woman, swept up in some fleeting fantasy. I understood the gravity of the situation, but more than that, I understood the hunger that had been gnawing at me for years. This wasn't just about physical desire. It was about connection, about the need to feel seen, to feel desired again after so long. I had spent so many years being proper, doing what was expected of me, that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply follow my heart or even my impulses. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "I want you to stay." David took a step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. I could see the hesitation in his movements, the internal struggle playing out across his face. He was trying to figure out whether this was real, whether I truly meant what I was saying. And the truth was, I wasn't sure myself, at least not in the way I thought I should be. But I knew that if he walked out of that door, something inside me would feel even more empty than it had before. Slowly, as if testing the waters, he walked toward me. His steps were measured, cautious, as though he were afraid of shattering the fragile moment that hung between us. When he reached the edge of the bed, he stopped, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before returning to meet mine. "Mrs. Hastings, ... He said my name softly, almost reverently, and the sound of it sent a shiver through me. "Are you sure?" His voice was laced with both desire and concern, as if he was afraid of crossing a line, even though we both knew we had already crossed it the moment he stepped into the room. "David, please." My voice was steadier now, firmer. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the fabric of his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath the thin cotton. "Don't call me that, just call me Helen." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing out in his eyes. But then something shifted. He nodded, and the tension in his body seemed to ease slightly, as though he had finally made his decision. "Helen," he whispered, and the sound of my name on his lips was like a balm to the loneliness I had been carrying for so long. I took a deep breath, my hand still resting lightly against his chest. I could feel the rapid beat of his heart beneath my palm, mirroring the erratic rhythm of my own. There was a charged silence between us, a moment suspended in time as we both stood on the precipice of something neither of us fully understood. Then, slowly, as if guided by some unseen force, David reached out and placed his hand over mine. His touch was tentative at first, hesitant, but as our fingers intertwined, I could feel the spark between us, the undeniable connection that had been building for weeks, finally finding its outlet. He took a step closer, his body now just inches from mine, and I could feel the heat radiating from him. My breath caught in my throat as his other hand came to rest gently on my shoulder, his fingers brushing the bare skin of my collarbone. The touch was so light, so tentative, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through me that made my knees feel weak. "I've never," David began, his voice trailing off as he looked down at me, his expression a mix of vulnerability and desire. "I've never been in a situation like this before." I smiled softly, my hand tightening slightly against his chest. "Neither have I whispered. "But that doesn't mean we can't figure it out together." For a moment he said nothing, his gaze searching mine as though he were trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, without another word, he leaned in, his lips brushing softly against my cheek in the lightest of kisses. It was a simple gesture, a small, hesitant act of intimacy, but it was enough to send a flood of warmth through my entire body. I closed my eyes, leaning into him, allowing myself to fully embrace the moment. I could feel the tension between us begin to melt away, replaced by something softer, more tender. David's hand slid up my arm, his fingers tracing the outline of my shoulder before coming to rest at the nape of my neck. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, and I could feel the unspoken question in his movements. He was still waiting for me to pull away, to change my mind. But I didn't. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, inviting him to continue, to take the next step, and he did. His lips moved to my neck, pressing soft, lingering kisses against my skin, each one sending a wave of heat through me. The room felt smaller, more intimate, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. It was just the two of us lost in this moment of unexpected connection, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. David's kisses were light, tentative, as if he were afraid of hurting me or overstepping an invisible boundary that neither of us knew quite how to navigate. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and soft, sending small waves of sensation through my body. His lips brushed against my neck, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt a deep, undeniable longing stir within me. We had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back now. The air between us had shifted, and with it the boundaries of what we had once been to each other dissolved. I was no longer just Helen, his friend's aunt, and he was no longer just David, the quiet boy who helped me with chores. We were something else now, something more complicated, more intimate. It scared me, but it also thrilled me in a way I hadn't expected. I let out a soft sigh as his lips moved lower, his hands gently guiding me back onto the bed. He paused for a moment, looking down at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I could tell he was still struggling with the idea of what we were doing, still grappling with the weight of the situation. But there was something else in his gaze, too. Something raw and vulnerable, something that mirrored the emotions I had been carrying with me for so long. He leaned in again, and this time I reached out, my hands finding their way to his shoulders. I could feel the tension in his muscles, the hesitation in his movements, but as I pulled him closer, that tension seemed to ease. His body relaxed against mine, and for the first time I felt the full weight of him, solid and real, a physical presence that grounded me in the moment. Our movements were slow, cautious, as if we were both afraid of rushing too quickly into something we weren't sure we could handle. But with each touch, each caress, I felt the walls between us begin to crumble. We were discovering each other in ways that transcended age, experience, or expectation. It wasn't just about physical desire. It was about connection, about filling the empty spaces we had both carried with us for so long. I found myself guiding his hands, encouraging him to explore the curves and contours of my body with a tenderness that made my heart race. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he were discovering something precious, something he had never expected to find. I could feel the trembling in his fingers, the unsteadiness in his breath. But as we moved together, that nervousness began to fade, replaced by something deeper, something more assured. And yet, even as we grew more comfortable with each other, there was a certain gentleness in the way we moved. It wasn't rushed, wasn't frantic or hurried. It was slow, deliberate, as if we were savoring every moment, every touch. I could feel the heat of his skin against mine, the way his body seemed to mold perfectly against my own, and for the first time in years, I felt truly desired. Not in the way I had been when I was younger, when attraction was based on appearances or fleeting desires, but in a way that was more profound, more meaningful. It was as if David saw me, not just as a woman, but as a person, someone who still had so much to offer, even after all these years. As we explored each other, I found myself thinking about how different this was from any other relationship I had ever had. There was no pretense, no expectations. It was just us in this moment, sharing something that neither of us had anticipated, and as our intimacy deepened, so did the connection between us. It wasn't just about filling a void or satisfying a desire. It was about rediscovering what it meant to be close to someone, to be vulnerable, to let down the walls I had built up around myself for so long. David's touch grew bolder as the minutes passed, and I found myself responding in ways I hadn't in years. There was a freedom in this, an exhilarating sense of rediscovery that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't since my youth. I had forgotten what it was like to be touched like this, to be seen, to be wanted. And the way David looked at me, with a mix of awe and tenderness, made me feel like I was someone new, someone capable of inspiring desire and passion once again. At one point, David paused, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled up at him, my heart swelling with warmth at the concern in his voice. "I'm more than okay," I whispered back, reaching up to brush a strand of hair away from his forehead. "I haven't felt this alive in years." His expression softened, and for a moment we just looked at each other, caught in the intimacy of the moment. There was no need for words. Everything we needed to say was in the way we touched, the way we held each other. And as we continued to explore each other, that connection only grew stronger, deeper. As we lay there together, the weight of the moment began to settle over us, heavy and comforting all at once. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the room bathed in a soft, golden twilight, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore outside the window was the only thing that broke the silence between us. David's breathing was slow and steady, his chest rising and falling in time with my own. His arm was draped loosely across my waist, his fingers brushing against my skin in a way that was both comforting and intimate. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the moment wash over me, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt truly at peace. But beneath that peace, there was something else, something more complex, more difficult to define. I could feel the weight of what had just happened between us, the significance of the connection we had shared. It wasn't just a physical act, though that had certainly been part of it. It was something deeper, something that had stirred emotions and desires I hadn't even realized I still had. I turned my head slightly, looking at David's face in the dim light. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful, but I could see the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Did he understand the significance of what had just happened? Or was it just a fleeting moment for him, something he would look back on with fondness but little emotional attachment? For me, it was so much more than that. This wasn't just about desire, about filling a void. It was about rediscovering a part of myself that I had thought was lost forever. It was about finding connection, intimacy, and vulnerability in a way that I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years. And though I didn't know what the future held for us, whether this would be a one-time thing or the beginning of something more, I knew that I had been changed by this moment. I reached out, my fingers brushing lightly against David's arm, and he stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. He looked down at me, his gaze soft and filled with a tenderness that made my heart ache in the best possible way. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. I smiled, nodding. "I'm more than okay," I whispered, my hand resting lightly against his chest. "I feel alive. For the first time in years, I feel alive." David's expression softened, and he leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. "You deserve to feel that way," he said quietly. "You deserve to feel alive." His words sent a warmth spreading through my chest, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I hadn't realized just how much I needed to hear that, how much I had been craving that sense of affirmation, that sense of being seen and valued. For so long I had felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions of life without really living it. But David had reminded me that there was still so much more to experience, so much more to feel. He had reminded me that I was still capable of desire, of passion, of connection. "I don't know what happens next," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm glad this happened. I'm glad you were the one." David smiled down at me, his eyes filled with warmth. "I'm glad too," he said, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair away from my face. You're amazing, Helen. I've always thought so." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a rush of emotion well up inside me. I hadn't realized just how much his presence had meant to me, how much I had come to value the way he looked at me, the way he saw me, not just as an older woman or as someone tied to his friend, but as a person with desires and dreams still alive inside me. In that moment, I felt truly understood, and it overwhelmed me in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. "You don't have to say that," I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. I didn't know how to accept such compliments, especially from someone so much younger. For years I had convinced myself that those parts of me were buried under time, lost to age. I had told myself that being desired, being seen like this, was something I no longer had a right to. David shook his head, his hand still gently stroking my cheek. "But it's true," he replied, his voice steady and filled with a sincerity that left no room for doubt. "You're incredible, Helen, and you deserve to know that." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and a small, tearful smile tugged at my lips. His words unlocked something inside me, a vulnerability I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. It wasn't just about the physical connection we had shared. It was about feeling valued, feeling seen, after so long of hiding myself away. As I lay there beside him, the quiet between us grew comfortable, almost serene. The earlier tension had melted away, replaced by something softer, warmer. I could feel the weight of what had happened between us, but I also felt lighter, as if a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. This moment wasn't just about rediscovering passion. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I thought had been lost forever. David shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at me. His fingers traced slow, lazy patterns along my arm, and I closed my eyes, savoring the sensation of being touched, of being held. It was a simple thing, but it felt profound in a way that words couldn't quite capture. "What are you thinking?" David asked quietly, his voice gentle as if he were afraid of breaking the moment. I opened my eyes and looked up at him, studying the way the fading light from the window softened the angles of his face. I wanted to tell him everything I was feeling, the joy, the confusion, the gratitude, but I wasn't sure how to put it into words. Instead, I reached up and brushed my fingers along his cheek, marveling at the warmth of his skin beneath my touch. "I'm thinking that I haven't felt this whole in a long time," I whispered. "I didn't know I still could." David's expression softened, and he leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. "You deserve this, Helen," he murmured against my skin. "You deserve to feel alive." His words settled deep inside me, and for the first time in years I believed them. I believed that I deserved to feel this way, to experience this connection. It wasn't about age or convention or what society might think. It was about the simple fact that I was still here, still capable of love and desire, still worthy of being seen. Eventually, the room grew darker as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, leaving us in the quiet embrace of twilight. David lay beside me, his breathing steady and calm, and I felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. The earlier intensity of our connection had given way to a peaceful stillness, one that allowed me to reflect on everything that had just happened. I hadn't expected this. Not today, not ever. But somehow it had unfolded in a way that felt natural, as though this was always meant to happen. The weight of years, of lost time and buried desires, seemed to melt away in the presence of this young man who had, in his own quiet way, brought me back to life. I thought about the future, about what this meant for us, for M.E. Would things go back to the way they were before? Would this moment be something we would look back on as a fleeting encounter, or was it the start of something more? The questions swirled in my mind, but I found that I wasn't anxious about the answers. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't focused on the what-ifs or the uncertainties. I was simply present, grateful for this moment, for the connection we had shared. David shifted beside me, turning onto his side so he could face me. His eyes were soft, filled with a kind of tenderness that made my heart ache. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair away from my face. I nodded, offering him a small smile. "I am," I replied honestly. "I really am." He returned my smile, and for a moment we just lay there, looking at each other. There was no need for words. The silence between us was filled with understanding. We had both shared something profound, something that had touched us both in ways neither of us had anticipated. But as the night grew darker, reality slowly began to creep back in. I knew that eventually David would have to leave. My nephew Jason would return, and life would resume its usual rhythm. But I also knew that something had shifted inside me, something that couldn't be undone. "David," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what this means for us. I don't know if we can continue this. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything." David's expression grew serious, and he nodded, his fingers gently tracing patterns on my arm. "I understand," he said quietly. "I wasn't expecting this either, but I'm glad it happened. And whatever comes next, I want you to know that I'll always be here for you." His words brought a lump to my throat, and I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." We stayed like that for a while longer, the silence between us comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Eventually, though, the reality of the situation began to settle in, and I knew that our time together was drawing to a close. David sat up slowly, pulling his shirt back on as he glanced toward the window. "I should probably go," he said softly, his voice tinged with reluctance. "Jason will be back soon, and I don't want him to, you." I nodded, understanding all too well. We couldn't pretend that this moment existed outside of the world around us. There were consequences, things to consider, and we both knew that. As David stood up, I reached out, catching his hand before he could leave. "David," I said, my voice steady, "I don't regret this, not for a second." He looked down at me, his eyes filled with warmth. "Neither do I," he replied softly. "Neither do I." With one last lingering look, he walked toward the door, leaving me alone in the quiet of the room. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. But despite the uncertainty of what the future held, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had taken a chance, allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in years, and for that, I was grateful. As I lay there in the quiet stillness of the night, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore outside my window, I found myself reflecting on the day, on everything that had led up to this moment. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't anticipated the way my life would shift in the course of a single afternoon. But as I thought about David, about the way he had looked at me, the way he had made me feel, I realized that I didn't regret any of it. This wasn't just about physical desire or a fleeting moment of passion. It was about connection, about rediscovering a part of myself that I had long thought was gone. For years I had convinced myself that I was no longer capable of being seen, of being wanted in that way. But David had reminded me that I was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling. I didn't know what the future held for us, for me. Maybe this would be a one-time thing, a beautiful moment that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Or maybe it would lead to something more, something deeper, something that would change both of our lives. I didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. I wasn't afraid of what might come next. As I lay there, wrapped in the warmth of the memory of what we had shared, I felt a quiet smile spread across my lips. Life, in all its unpredictability, had given me something I hadn't even realized I was missing, and for that, I was grateful. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I was still capable of love, of desire, of connection, and that more than anything was a gift I would cherish for the rest of my life. At 67, I had settled into a life that was quiet but comfortable. Retirement suited me well, no more early mornings, no deadlines, just the peace of my small suburban home on the outskirts of Boston. My days were filled with simple pleasures, gardening, reading, the occasional dinner with friends, and of course visits from my family. But everything changed the day my granddaughter Emily brought her boyfriend Adam to meet me. He was charming, polite, and far too handsome for his own good. I thought nothing of it at first. After all, I was just the grandmother, a distant figure in their young lives. But it didn't stay that way, and now I find myself reflecting on how one seemingly innocent connection spiraled into something neither of us expected, something we both knew was wrong, yet couldn't stop. Emily had always been the light of my life. My only granddaughter, she spent a lot of time with me as a child, and we remained close even after she moved away for college. So when she told me she was bringing someone special home to meet me, I was thrilled. I hadn't seen her in a few months, and I was eager to catch up and meet the young man she was so smitten with. When they arrived that afternoon, I remember thinking how well they suited each other, Emily, with her bright smile and energetic nature, and Adam, tall and striking, with a calm confidence that balanced her perfectly. He had a way about him that immediately put me at ease, polite, engaging, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. "Gran, this is Adam," Emily said with a wide smile as they stepped into my cozy kitchen. "He's been dying to meet you." Adam stepped forward, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Mrs. Lane, it's a pleasure to meet you. Emily talks about you all the time." "Please call me Rose," I said, waving away the formalities. "I'm glad she finally brought you by." I couldn't help but notice how Adam seemed to blend seamlessly into our conversation over lunch. He was articulate, funny, and even managed to ask thoughtful questions about my gardening project, something Emily barely pretended to care about. It was refreshing to have someone in the house who seemed genuinely interested in the small details of my life. I found myself enjoying Adam's company more than I expected. Perhaps it was simply the joy of having someone new to talk to, or perhaps it was something deeper, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. Over the next few months, Emily and Adam visited regularly. I watched their relationship grow, and though I was happy for her, I also began to notice something strange, something about the way Adam looked at me. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. Why would a 28-year-old man show any interest in someone like me, a 67-year-old widow, well past her prime? But the glances continued. Subtle at first, Adam's eyes lingering on me just a little too long when we spoke, his smiles seeming just a bit too warm. And then there were the small moments, his hand brushing against mine, when he passed me a dish at the dinner table, the way he leaned in closer than necessary when asking me a question. I told myself I was overthinking it. I had to be. There was no way Adam was actually interested in me. I was Emily's grandmother, for heaven's sake. But as time went on, I couldn't deny the strange thrill that his attention gave me. It wasn't just the excitement of being noticed, it was something more. Adam made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. My husband, God rest his soul, had passed away over a decade ago, and though I had learned to live alone, I hadn't realized how much I missed the feeling of being desired, of being the focus of someone's attention. And the more Adam looked at me like that, the harder it became to ignore the growing tension between us. One evening, Emily invited me to join her and Adam for a weekend dinner at their apartment in the city. I hesitated at first. Boston was a bit of a trek for me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to intrude on their time together, but Emily insisted. When I arrived, I was struck by how comfortable they seemed together, laughing and joking as they prepared dinner. I felt like a bit of an outsider at first, but Adam made an effort to include me in every conversation, pulling me into the warmth of their shared world. After dinner, Emily received an urgent call from work and had to step out, leaving me and Adam alone for the first time. I should have felt awkward, but I didn't. We were sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, talking about his work in architecture, and I realized how much I enjoyed our conversations. He was different from anyone I had met in years, sharp, curious, and surprisingly empathetic for someone his age. The conversation shifted, becoming more personal. We talked about life, love, loss. I told him about my late husband, about how hard it had been to adjust to life without him. Adam listened with an intensity that unnerved me, but also comforted me. It had been so long since I had spoken to anyone about those feelings. And then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. We were sitting close, too close, and I could feel the tension building between us. Adam's eyes locked on mine, and for a moment neither of us said anything. "Rose," he started, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "You're incredible, you know that." My heart skipped a beat. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But the way he looked at me, it was like he saw a part of me I had long buried, a part that had been waiting to be awakened. "Adam," I whispered, shaking my head, "we shouldn't." But before I could finish, his hand brushed mine and I felt a spark shoot through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as he leaned closer, his lips just inches from mine. And then, without thinking, without stopping to consider the consequences, I kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like we were both testing the boundaries of this new, dangerous territory. But then it deepened, and I found myself pulling him closer, losing myself in the warmth of his touch. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, reality came crashing down around us. I stared at him, my mind racing, guilt flooding through me. "Adam, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Emily." "I know," he said, his eyes filled with regret, but also something else, something darker, more complicated. "But I can't stop thinking about you." After that night, everything changed. Adam and I tried to act normal when Emily was around, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every time we were alone, I could feel the pull between us, the unspoken desire that lingered just beneath the surface. We kept our distance for a while, trying to convince ourselves that what had happened was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But the more we tried to resist, the stronger the attraction became. One afternoon, Emily asked me to pick something up from their apartment while she was at work. Adam was home, of course, and I should have known better than to go alone. But I went, telling myself it was just a quick errand, nothing more. When I arrived, Adam was waiting for me at the door, a faint smile on his lips. "Thanks for coming by, Rose," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "I didn't think you'd come." "I'm just picking something up," I said, avoiding his gaze. "I won't stay long." But I never got the chance to leave. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, Adam was there, his hands on my shoulders, pulling me close. I tried to resist, tried to tell him no, but the truth was I didn't want to. We kissed again, and this time it wasn't tentative. It was filled with all the desire, all the tension we had been holding back for weeks. I knew it was wrong, knew that if Emily found out it would destroy everything. But in that moment I didn't care. All I cared about was the way Adam made me feel alive, desired, wanted. We spent the next few weeks tangled in a dangerous affair, sneaking around whenever Emily wasn't home, finding excuses to be alone together. It was reckless, and every time we were together, the guilt gnawed at me, but the thrill of it, the excitement, was too much to resist. As the affair continued, the guilt became unbearable. I couldn't look Emily in the eye without feeling a sick twist in my stomach. She had no idea what was happening behind her back, no idea that the man she loved was betraying her with her own grandmother. I tried to end it with Adam. I told him we couldn't keep doing this, that it wasn't fair to Emily, but every time I tried to pull away, he would find a way to pull me back in, reminding me of the connection we shared, the way he made me feel. "It's not just about the sex, Rose," he said one night, his voice low and serious. "It's about us. You understand me in a way no one else does." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that what we had was real, that it was more than just a fling, more than just a mistake. But the truth was, I knew better. I knew that this couldn't last, that it would end in disaster. But by then it was already too late. It all came crashing down one evening when Emily came home earlier than expected. Adam and I had been careless, too caught up in the excitement of the affair to notice the time. We were in the kitchen when she walked in, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal as she saw us together, too close, too intimate. "What the hell is going on here?" Emily's voice was sharp, her face pale as she took in the scene before her. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened my mouth to explain, to try and make sense of what she was seeing, but no words came out. How could I explain this? How could I possibly justify what I had done? Adam stepped forward, his expression calm, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "Emily, we need to talk." "No," she spat, shaking her head. "I don't need you to talk. I can see exactly what's happening." Her words were like a knife to the heart. I had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and now there was no going back. Emily stood frozen, her eyes flicking between Adam and me as the reality of what she had just witnessed sank in. I could see the hurt and confusion turning into rage, and I knew in that moment that whatever fragile happiness we had built as a family was about to be shattered. "Emily," I began, my voice trembling, "please, let me explain." She backed away, her face pale, hands clenched into fists. Explain? What could you possibly say to make this better, Grandma? What could possibly explain this? Her voice broke, cracking under the weight of her shock and betrayal. I couldn't find the words. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as guilt crushed me from all sides. I had betrayed my granddaughter, someone I had raised, someone who trusted me implicitly, and now there was no way to fix this. Adam, ever the composed one, tried to step in. "Emily, just listen." "Don't," she shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare try to explain this. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me, both of you?" I stood there, silent, knowing there was no answer that would make it better. Adam looked down, clearly realizing that there was nothing he could say to calm her down. The weight of the situation was bearing down on him too, and for the first time I saw panic flash across his face. Emily's face twisted in pain as tears welled up in her eyes. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "Both of you." Emily didn't stay to hear any explanations. She grabbed her keys and stormed out of the house before either of us could say another word. I wanted to run after her, to beg her to stay, to somehow make her understand how everything had spiraled out of control. But what could I say? What could possibly undo the hurt we'd caused? The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. I turned to Adam, my heart racing, my mind numb. "We have to fix this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "She'll calm down," Adam said quietly, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "We'll talk to her tomorrow. She just needs time to process everything." I shook my head, unable to believe that he thought this was something we could smooth over with time. "No, Adam. She won't forgive us for this." Adam walked over to me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "It's going to be okay," he said softly, but his words felt hollow. "We'll figure it out." But deep down I knew we wouldn't. The weight of what we had done was too heavy to carry any longer. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when Emily had walked in on us over and over in my mind. I kept seeing the look in her eyes: shock, betrayal, pain. It was seared into my memory, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had destroyed something irreplaceable. I thought about how Emily had grown up, how much I had loved being a part of her life. From her first steps to her high school graduation, I had been there for all of it. I had been the one she turned to for advice, the one she trusted. And now all of that was gone, tainted by a mistake I could never take back. Adam stayed the night, though we barely spoke. In the morning he tried to reassure me again, but I could feel the distance growing between us. The excitement, the danger, the thrill that had once electrified our affair was now gone, replaced by guilt and regret. "I'm going to try to talk to her today," Adam said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'll explain everything." "What are you going to explain?" I asked bitterly. "That we both lost control? That we hurt her for our own selfish reasons?" He sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "Rose, I never meant to hurt her. I care about you, you know that. But Emily—" "Emily is the one we should have been thinking about all along," I interrupted, my voice thick with emotion. "She trusted us, Adam, and we've broken that trust." He nodded, but I could tell that even he didn't fully grasp the depth of what we had done. He was younger, and while the consequences for him were heavy, they weren't as life-altering as they were for me. I had lost more than just my granddaughter. I had lost the sense of who I was. Days passed, and Emily still hadn't returned my calls. Each day I woke up with a heavy sense of dread, knowing that our relationship was hanging in the balance. I left her voicemails apologizing, begging her to talk to me, to let me explain, but she didn't respond. Adam tried reaching out as well, but his attempts were met with the same cold silence. I could see the guilt eating away at him too, but unlike me, he still had a life outside of this. He had his career, his friends. For me, Emily had been my world, my last connection to a life that had once felt full and meaningful. One afternoon, I decided to go to Emily's apartment. I hadn't heard from her in over a week, and the silence was unbearable. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest, hoping that she would at least let me in. The door opened a crack, and Emily stood there, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Emily," I whispered, taking a step forward, but she held up her hand, stopping me. "Don't," she said, her voice cold and distant. "Just don't, Grandma." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Please, Emily, I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, but You didn't just hurt me," she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. "You destroyed everything. You're my grandmother. How could you do this to me, to us?" I felt tears welling in my eyes. "I don't know. I don't have an excuse. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I let myself get swept up in something that I never should have. But I love you, Emily. You have to believe that." She shook her head, her eyes filled with hurt. "I don't know if I can believe that anymore." Emily didn't slam the door in my face, but she didn't let me in either. She told me she needed time, that she wasn't ready to talk yet, but at least it wasn't a final goodbye. That sliver of hope was all I had left to hold on to. Adam and I stopped seeing each other. It wasn't a decision we discussed in detail, but it was clear that our affair had run its course. The excitement, the passion, had been replaced by the cold reality of what we had done. I knew we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and continuing down that path would only make things worse. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Every time I saw Emily's picture, every time I thought of her, I was reminded of how much I had lost. But slowly, I began to find a new rhythm. I threw myself into my garden, into volunteering at the local library, into anything that would help me move forward. I still hadn't given up hope that one day Emily and I could repair what was broken. It would take time, maybe more time than I had left, but I was willing to wait. I had to believe that, deep down, she still cared about me, that the bond we shared wasn't completely destroyed. It's been nearly a year since that day. Emily and I have started talking again, though things are still strained between us. We've met for coffee a few times, and while our conversations are cautious, there's a flicker of the closeness we once had. I've learned a lot in the time since the affair ended. I've learned that desire can blind you, that even at 67, you can make mistakes that have life-altering consequences. I've learned that some things, no matter how much you wish otherwise, can't be undone. But I've also learned that forgiveness both of others and of yourself takes time. And while I'm still learning to forgive myself for the choices I made, I know that the only way forward is to keep trying, one day at a time. As for Adam, I haven't spoken to him in months. He moved on, as I knew he would, and while I don't regret the moments we shared, I understand now that they were fleeting, a temporary escape from the loneliness I had been carrying for years. I still think about him sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and the memories of what we had flicker through my mind like ghosts. But I know now that those memories belong in the past, and that my future, whatever it holds, must be built on something more solid than fleeting desires. Life doesn't always go the way you expect. Sometimes it takes you down paths you never thought you'd walk, but you learn, you grow, and eventually you find your way back to the people who matter most.